which I was live yesterday. So for all the people that wanted to come back for more, here we are. And I'm not alone this time. I'm joined by Joe Tegtmeyer, and we were thinking today that we would be able to talk about the Starliner, but obviously that has been postponed, and it wasn't necessarily an issue with Starliner, although we'll get into that. But it sounds like the next launch attempt will be no earlier than May 10th. So the wait continues. It's been a longer wait than we thought it would be, just in general for Starliner. There's a lot of, I think, a lot of FUD that comes along with Starliner, unfortunately, because that's not great considering there's crew on board. But we'll talk about that. And I was telling Joe, I want to get into some discussion that I saw yesterday on X that I thought was really interesting here. So I'm going to share the screen and show you what I'm talking about. So Eric Berger, who I just interviewed for Ellie in Space, shared an article saying the surprise is not that Boeing lost commercial crew, but that it finished at all. The structural inefficiency was a huge deal. So he shared this article, obviously with kind of a negative tone about Starliner. Dr. Chris Combs, who I've also interviewed, he does a wind tunnel down in San Antonio, said predictably on what should be a big day for NASA, Boeing commercial crew, etc. Eric Berger, Elon's #1 fan, drops a piece gleefully documenting the shortcomings of the Starliner program. Instead of declaring Boeing lost the commercial crew program to SpaceX, why not focus on the fact that we will hopefully soon be able to say the U.S. has not one, but 2 commercial crew delivery platforms. There are 6 contracted Starliner missions, by the way. It's not like Boeing is getting cut out after today. So he thought that Eric had a negative tone. And to put this all into perspective, Elon comments later saying the world doesn't need another capsule. What matters is fully reusable rockets and spacecraft. So some people were wondering, what drama was I talking about yesterday? There were a few instances of drama, but this one, I just feel like, people are so split. Some people are just really excited about it. Other people maybe are maybe a little bit more realistic. So let's talk about it, because there's definitely a lot of opinions about Starliner, and, we have a couple more days until it officially launches.
Well, thanks for having me on the channel. It's been a while, and you were over in Japan for a long time, and a lot of stuff has happened in between. And, so there's a lot going on with space. This is one of them, probably the most, current one. And it is good to talk about. All of these comments, the timing for the article, what Chris is saying, what Elon said, and all that, I think maybe if we just take a step back and maybe think about timing of all this, may not have been the best, but maybe there's other context or maybe a different way of thinking about all these things. First of all, the Starliner program, whether you love it or hate it, is an important program to have. And it's going to be another way for us to take astronauts to the ISS, maybe other missions in the future, depends on how things go. But this is a very important mission for NASA. It's a very important mission for the space program for the United States. And it's obviously got a lot of importance for Boeing to be able to demonstrate that they can, launch successfully and be able to provide that service. So it's not unexpected to me that there was, some issues yesterday, and they were very, cautious on their approach. So I don't really look at this and say this is a big failure or anything like that. I think it's just they're being extremely cautious. They know that the stakes are quite high, and they want to make sure it works out, correctly.
And let's also make sure that we talk about, why they scrubbed. And here's a post. Can you guys see it? The screen change. Oh, wait, no, you can't see it. Sorry. Oh. I'm doing too many things at once. Okay. Jenny Hotman, who takes photos of down there in the Cape, says yesterday, NASA, Boeing, and ULA scrubbed the launch of Starliner crew flight test due to a faulty oxygen relief valve observation on the rocket, actually, the Centaur second stage. So that surprised a lot of people, including Scott Manley, who posted as well, this is usually so reliable, this rocket. So that was also a bit surprising. Some people I've even say it's a cover up for an issue with Starliner. So there's just like so much negative attention on this entire thing.
Yeah, well, I think you know, hearing that there is an oxygen relief valve and there was a problem with that is kind of putting together multiple different valve issues that we've seen in the past. One of them had to do with some of the rockets themselves for the Starliner about a year or so ago, where they were having problems with the valve for their thrusters, and that caused a huge delay. We also see that with the Orion spacecraft, which is different than this, there was some valve issues that were in, and then we see this valve issue. So I think maybe people
Here
may
they
be
go.
conflating all of that
Butch and
together,
Sunny walking
but in this particular case, you know, it has to do with the Atlas V, and
across
you know,
the
it's a
practice
good
arm.
friend of mine who's been with the SpaceX program for a very long time, and Chinnery would talk about valves are extremely important for rockets in general, and they can be extremely complex, and they can actually have failures like this, or at least they don't work in the expected manner, which is what it sounds like to me in this case. So,
well, that's what Tom Mueller was also saying. He's those dang valves are like always the root cause of some problem. So valves are very, very important. And you'll be seeing my part 2, the tour with Tom of Impulse Space, pretty soon here.
right. And I don't know if he got into it, but part of the reason why valves are so difficult is that they have to work in such a huge, wide-ranging environment. Sometimes they have cryogenics going through, and then sometimes they're at room temperature. They have different kinds of materials that are flowing through there. It could be gaseous oxygen. It could be liquid oxygen in this case. So valves have to do a lot, and it's very easy for them to have issues.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just okay. So there's Tori Bruno. A lot of these videos I hadn't seen from yesterday, and I think playing a little B-roll is interesting here. But you know, as far as May 10th, I guess we'll have to see how the weather is. Do you think that, you know, this is going to be another long delay, or do you think this next attempt could be actually successful?
I don't know, because since this is in the rocket itself, they're going to have to get into the rocket, take a look at it, whether that can be done on the pad, or is it going to require a rollback, is going to be something that I think they're going to be looking at right now. It sounds like it's on the rocket, not the ground support facilities themselves. So that may or may not make it an easier fix. But I think that they want to not only take a look at it, but I think they're going to want to try to see if they can duplicate the problem, identify what that is, and then figure out, do they have to replace it, or can they just do a different procedure and then move on? So, you know, it could take just today and then they'll figure it out, or it could take a lot longer. I know that sounds kind of like a wishy-washy answer, but it is true with with rocket systems like this. I am hoping that sometime this weekend will work out. And as you mentioned, the weather, you know, one of the good things about the flexibility for this mission is that the ISS has already relocated the Dragon capsule. The port is open. I think it has a few months of opportunity as far as the port. So, you know, they will have some time to work through this and then pick the time that's right, rather than, you know, if they don't get it by May 15th, it's over, you know, that kind of thing. So,
Right.
So I think that, especially with the stakes of this particular mission, they're going to take their time to make sure that they can duplicate it, understand it, and then be able to be sure that this is going to work. And you know, rockets have thousands of different parts and systems as well. So they may get this fixed and something else may pop up as well. We'll just have to see how this goes.
Well, and I feel like the issue continues to, you know, compound because people are very critical of Boeing in general right now. And so, you know, talking to a friend who's not as familiar with the space industry, it's like, well, you know, it's Boeing. So, I mean, it's just can't catch a break.
Yeah, well, you know, it's unfortunate that Boeing is getting that kind of reputation. Some of it, I think, is deserved. Some of it may be, you know, over the top. But the one thing that is very true about the Starliner is that it is many years delayed, and it is over its budget. And I think Boeing has actually been taking the risk financially on it now, and it's been costing them quite a bit. So financially, it's a big issue for Boeing, but also reputation. This is a huge issue too. They need this to go right. It needs to go well. We obviously want to protect the astronauts themselves, but from a product standpoint, this actually has to work, and it has to work 100%. So, I think that's what we're seeing with the caution. I see that Ross has that comment about whether the valve needs replacing or not, and that is very true. Like I said, they could duplicate it and they figure out it is a hardware problem, or they may find out it was a sensor problem. That does come up as well. So, hopefully we'll get some word soon so we know.
What do you think about that comment from Elon saying we don't need another capsule? We need fully reusable rockets. I mean, his words have a lot of influence. He's very powerful. Obviously, he's well known for SpaceX, and SpaceX is, been shaking up the industry for years. But what do you think about that?
I think, when Elon says something, obviously it gets a lot of attention, but I think that sometimes he has a different meaning, or maybe there's multiple meanings to what he has to say.
Right.
I personally don't take it as a shot of saying, the Starliner is horrible, scrap it. I think that's how some people are reading it. I think what he's looking at is saying that the idea of capsules themselves is something that needs to be put into the past. We need to start looking to the future, having reusable systems that provide a lot more capability, provide more functions than just what a capsule does. And that's the way I'm reading that particular comment. Now, it's on a post that has to do with the Starliner launching right now. So I think people will put that together. And as I said, sometime timing, maybe not the best time.
Yeah, it was just interesting to see, Eric's article come out, and then Dr. Chris Combs say, why are you being so negative? And then Elon commenting, we don't need this capsule. And then Dr. Chris Combs saying, of course, this whole idea that
well, I've met Chris too, and sometimes he can be a little bit probing as well.
He can be a little negative. Yes. Well, let's have a quick pause to show you what I made yesterday.
Awesome.
It has to get venting here, so I just press the button. Hopefully it starts venting. But this is a 3D printed Falcon 9. If you guys missed the assembly yesterday, I did this live, and it didn't take that long. I was rambling most of the time, and I think it took less than an hour. So, this is supposed to happen. So this is actually maneuverable like you would see the real thing. And so we have the crew access arm, and, it rotates, and I think it's pretty well done. I don't know.
Hopefully the strong back raises it, and then it doesn't go back down while it's launching.
Well, it stays, I mean, pretty good. I don't know why it's not doing the water thing though. So hopefully maybe it just needs to heat up. But
it's a valve issue.
I want to show that. Yeah, right. I want to show that off. And then yesterday I showed off the Lego shuttle. So now I'm a Lego fan. I had never done Legos as a kid, ever. And now my boyfriend and I are looking at buying, some crazy Legos, 5,000 pieces, which is not a lot, or is way more than that one, rather. So yeah. But so there's some of the Starliner drama. It got pretty heated on X yesterday. I was telling K10 that people woke up and chose violence yesterday on the internet. Although isn't that every day on the internet? And so,
but it's just the space program is important to a lot of people. The Starliner has had its issues, so I can understand that. But right now we have a system that's trying to be launched. We have people that are going to be on the capsule. It's going to provide a function for our space program. So I hope that we can at least right now, cheer them on and hope that it works out well. And actually, I wanted to bring up something of sort of interest with the Starliner launch. We talked about the astronauts. I think it's Barry Wilmore, if I get it right, and of course Suni. And some people were asking if she was the first, or if she is the first female astronaut to be on the debut of a new system. And what do you think? Do you think she is?
Hmm.
Well, if you look at Mercury, it was Alan Shepard. So no.
I'm leaning toward yes.
Kind of. And the answer is a little bit of a nuance. It depends on how you want to
Define system.
define that. And the reason why is that Wally Funk actually was on the New Shepard. And she actually has quite a bit of history with the NASA program. She's an accomplished pilot herself. She was part of something called the Mercury 13, or at least colloquially called the Mercury 13, which was looking at women flying in space way back during the Mercury program. And unfortunately, it never actually came to pass, but she went through all of the training, all of the standards that the astronauts did for the Mercury 7. And she was on the first New Shepard. So do you count that as she being the first, or do you think Suni here is the first?
I think you're right. I think it's a little nuanced. You just reminded me that when I was growing up, my family had a lot of cats, and my mom worked in the aviation industry as an engineer, and so we named all of the cats. She had Orville and Wilbur, and then we had Sally, and then we had Wally for Wally Funk. So I grew up, not really understanding the significance as much, and that's just a fun little theme here.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is Wally was the youngest member of the Mercury 13, and up until William Shatner flew, she was the oldest person to fly to space.
Wow, that's right. That's right. Okay, so I wanted to share another thing from yesterday, because I'm telling you, I was like online, and just the shade and the drama continued. So here's Lori Garver's page, and I haven't seen much of her. We know that she's the author of Escaping Gravity. This is her quest to transform NASA and launch a new space age. Really great book. So she has a pretty important role in the space industry, and I was just surprised to see her kind of throwing shade. So here we have, the difference between SpaceX and Starliner transportation. And she sort of says it all, ... Right. And so we have the Model X with the doors, and then we have this van. And I was just surprised to see her kind of sassy about this. Obviously the transportation doesn't really matter that much, but it was just interesting. And then she also goes to say, she actually defends it and says similar comparison can be made of their suits. Preferences may vary. SpaceX looks sleek, but she says it's reminiscent of Spaceballs. Boeing Space, more destination moon with practical pockets. Variety is the spice of life, and Godspeed to all. So I just thought that it was I think it's interesting to make the comparisons, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's function, and then there's what they look like. Personally, this is just me. I like the SpaceX ones because it does look more modern.
Yeah.
The blue ones look a little silly to me, but they all perform a certain function.
Right.
The Boeing suits are interesting in the sense that the helmet zips on. It's kind of a semi solid kind of a fabric, I don't know, kind of thing. And you can see them kind of hanging off the back, whereas the SpaceX ones are that 3D printed version. It looks more like a helmet we would think would look like. But overall, yeah, I guess we're moving into the realm of space fashion now.
Well, and with that, it's a perfect time to bring up.
Suit flow initiated. Stand by for Dragon bending sequence.
rotation.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting,
SpaceX is go for EVA operations.
Oh, I love that. I love that finale there. So yeah, let's break this down. So the Polaris Dawn crew was interviewed this weekend, and they revealed these suits that they've been working on for over 2 years for the first ever commercial spacewalk. These are the EVA suits, and there's been so much, speculation and what are these going to look like. So this is a pretty good view here. So let's talk about it because you're the technical expert.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's kind of neat to how that they've basically evolved the design from the IVA or the intra vehicle suit that you see them wearing, the one that we saw, the comparison between the Boeing and the SpaceX suits. Those are really meant to be kind of the defense for the last defense in case they were to depressurize, but the capsule itself is in place. This is obviously the next step to go outside of the capsule or go into a depressurized environment. And it's kind of neat to see how they've done this iterative design. And, I think Elon put a quote out there or a post out there saying that this is going to continue to evolve. And eventually we're going to see kind of a backpack and maybe a jetpack, that kind of thing. But what this reminds me a lot of is the first, I'm going to say it Gemini, because that's how it was pronounced back when it was for real, and I remember that. But the Gemini program, they did their first EVAs, if you will, or spacewalks, and they were tethered spacesuits, just similar to this as well. And the advantage of that is that you can have the life support systems built into the capsule, and you don't have to have it all designed onto the suit. So it makes the suit a little more streamlined, a little bit simpler to build, at least at this stage. And doing this in 2 years is pretty impressive to me. Another thing that I noticed, you were seeing the movement of the hands, the twisting of the forearm, and then the movement of the shoulder. Looks like most of the movement that they built into it is from the waist up, and that may be either intentional for this particular use, or maybe it's just showing that the iterative design process is, only got to this point. And for the Polaris Dawn first mission, this will be more than enough. Because essentially they're just going to, get out of the capsule, do their thing in space. I think Sarah said that the space walk profile is about 2 hours long, which includes the egress and the ingress into the capsule, plus what they're going to do on the outside. So, this suit and its movement and what it's designed for, it looks like it's designed for just a few hours, pretty much. And I did see, I think Chris Hadfield, who's
I was just about to pull that up. Hold on, let me find it. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Okay, So he commented on. Okay, let me pull it up because I think it's good to read it. That's so funny. I mean, I tell you, we could do an episode every single week about what the heck is going on X, because there's some really interesting discussion, and it's interesting to see this discussion between Jared Isaacman and Chris Hadfield, right? It's like, something that they could have texted, but I don't know, it's just interesting to see different perspectives of such, professional people.
Hey,
So
by the way, before we get that, could I just mention one thing and it kind of was what we were just talking about, is there's an astronaut, he was on STS-130, Terry Virts. He was one class behind me at the Air Force Academy. And he has published several books now since his astronaut days, and he's got this new one out, and it's pretty cool. And it's basically Astronaut's Guide to Leaving the Planet. But one of the things that he talks about is that Gemini space mission, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. You can see it's tethered, and it's a kind of a slimmed down suit, similar to what we're seeing with the SpaceX one. It didn't have tons of mobility, just like we're seeing with the current SpaceX one as well. But this is essentially the same kind of level that Polaris Dawn is trying to replicate, but with a commercial crew. So for those who weren't sure exactly what I was talking about, that's what I was meaning.
Okay, so let's read. Excuse me, I'm still getting over being sick. Coming
Yeah.
home from Japan. Okay, so Chris says, sleek new commercial spacewalking suit, SpaceX. And he has questions. What pressure is inside the suit? How supple is range of motion when pressurized? Where does the umbilical attach? Can you access the umbilical to tend it? How to attach structure to free up hands for work? Spark sources in 100% oxygen. Diaper.
Yeah. Well, this is actually good. And before you get to Jared Isaacman's response, I'm going to put a little bit of context to the first two questions: the pressure inside the suit, and then how supple is the range of motion when pressurized. Those are actually very important parts of a spacesuit in general, and that's because a spacesuit is kind of like a large balloon that you have around you, and if you pressurize it to the atmosphere that we have here, 14.7 psi, for example, then it becomes this really rigid balloon, and it's really difficult to move around because basically you're just going to be like stuck like this, and you can't move it around. So they have to come to a reasonable pressure that allows life support to happen, but also allows freedom of movement. And that's generally what that conversation is about. And there's a couple of ways they can do that. One is they can lower the pressure down. And I think they're going to use about 5.1 psi, which is similar to being on, say, like Pikes Peak or so, maybe about 15,000 feet in the atmosphere. They also have those. We saw the shoulder and the wrist. And they have like ball bearing joints, and that helps with that mobility while it's pressurized. So that's what the question is getting at.
Right. And Jared answers. So let's see what he says, because Chris put out a lot of questions. So Jared says, hi, Chris. Around 5.1. So his first question was, what is the pressure inside the suit? Now, is that, like, explain that for me, because I don't have any indication of what is a normal pressure.
Okay, well, right now what you're breathing and what we are experiencing here is atmospheric pressure that is called either 1 bar or 14.7 psi, and that's what we encounter all of the time. And the mixture of the gases in the air that we're breathing is about 78% nitrogen, about 20-ish% oxygen, a little bit of argon, and then some other materials in there. So that's what we are breathing and what we're feeling right now. Now, if you go and let's say you were going in an unpressurized airplane and you went up in altitude, up until about 6,000 feet, which is roughly, public math, just under 2,000 meters, maybe 1,800 meters or so, you lose almost half of the pressure of the atmosphere. So at that altitude, if you're in an unpressurized plane, you'd be feeling somewhere around 7 psi. And if you go up a little bit more, like to say the top of Pikes Peak, which is about 14,000 feet roughly, then the pressure is going to be around 5 psi. So they're kind of duplicating that kind of atmosphere. So we know that we can go to the top of that mountain and we can breathe. And we know that we can function properly. So we know that that pressure works pretty well. But another thing that they are trying to do, and it has to do, you hear a lot of this with scuba, where people, go down and they get the bends, and that's because nitrogen comes out of your solution. It makes air bubbles, and it gets into your bloodstream, and that's extremely painful. It could be deadly.
Right.
So, yeah, and you can actually experience that going up as well. We have things called hyperbaric chambers where you do altitude sickness training. I actually went through it multiple times myself. You try to learn about your symptoms of hypoxia, which is low oxygen, and how you react. So it can happen both ways. So one of the things that they will do to try to minimize that is to try to get the nitrogen out of your system. So there's a couple of ways of doing that, but I think that what they're going to try to do in Polaris Dawn is that hours before the spacewalk happens, is they're going to lower the pressure within the capsule itself to be close to about that 5 psi roughly, so that it's similar. They'll also start getting rid of the nitrogen and putting more and more oxygen into the system, so that as you breathe and you exhale, you get rid of that nitrogen so that you don't have possibility of having the bends. So we'll probably see a profile where that happens, and then when they're ready, they'll all be donned into the suit. They'll all have that same PSI. They'll have that near 100% oxygen a gas mixture, and then that's what they will be using during the spacewalk. And this part of Chris's question, and we can get back to Jared about the 100% oxygen in the Spark, is actually one of the saddest parts of our space program, and that goes back to Apollo 1 when was it Grissom, Chaffee, and White on Apollo 1 were in a test. And at that time, they used 100% oxygen for the atmosphere. And unfortunately, there was actually an electrical spark, and we ended up losing 3 astronauts for that. And we learned quite a bit about using 100% oxygen. So that's why now we try to use either a nitrox or a lower pressure or a combination of that so that we can minimize or avoid the risk with having all that oxygen.
Right, right. And okay, so Jared also answers saying, always the challenge, but mobility and dexterity is a big focus throughout dev or development. He says standard suit and Dragon umbilical attachment points with additional tether and secondary oxygen and avionics ports.
Yeah, so I think what he's getting at is the answer to Chris's question. And Chris's question, in my mind, is coming from the standpoint of having been an astronaut in his case, and having suits or systems that you need to be able to operate. And if something were to go wrong, say the system's malfunctioning, or maybe it's threat of disconnecting, or you have to do adjustments, you as the operator really want to understand, where is it located? Can I get access to it? What can I do to fix issues? So I think that's what he was generally asking. And you can see what Jared is saying is, it's a standard umbilical attachment points, additional tether. And that's important because you don't want to rely on your oxygen tube to be the tether for the spacecraft, because you don't want to put a lot of strain onto that tube or your connections with the electronics. You want to have something else so that you don't float away, but you're also not putting stress on those critical functions. So I think that's what he's getting at. And he's also wondering, where does it attach? And I think he means, where does it attach on the suit so that you have access to it? And,
so it says standard and Dragon umbilical attachment points. And he's saying yes to this question of, can you access the umbilical to tend it?
Right. And I think on the standard IVA suit, and this is a iteration of that, I think it's in the right leg area of the suit. So that's what he means by this standard attachment points.
Right. And so this next question of how to attach to structure to free up hands for work. And Jared says objective is primarily a suit test matrix, and there is a hands-free demo using foot mobility aid. Okay.
Well, I'm trying to remember the actual name of it, but if you remember in Inspiration 4, they had that cupola dome.
Yeah.
So they could, look outside. They're not going to have it this time because they need to have a port to be able to get out, and it would be through that area. So they've designed a kind of a structure that will aid with their EVA. And, that structure needed to be designed in an interesting way to support not only the astronauts, but also it's in the area where the Draco engines are. So it's going to be subjected to sort of the heat, the thrust that you get out of the Draco. So it has to survive that, but it also has to survive or provide a access point for the astronauts. And it sounds like to me that on that structure, there will be some kind of devices that allow them to clip their feet into it. Almost like if you've ever seen like the space shuttle where they had the Canada arm and they had astronauts on the end of the arm and they were kind of attached with their feet. I think it's something similar to that is what he has in mind.
Right. And so the two last questions are spark sources in 100% oxygen, with which Jared says part of qualification testing. And then as far as diaper goes, 2-hour operation, but if you gotta go, you gotta go.
Right. Yeah. The unfortunate reality of the spacesuit is that, you know, what you bring with you stays with you. And, you know, they have to take that into mind. I'm sure they're going to have some sort of systems just in case, but also the EVA, you know, like what Sarah said, it's about a 2-hour give or take time frame. So for the purpose of this particular EVA, the demonstration, what they're trying to achieve, the data that they're going to collect, hopefully 2 hours plus or minus is enough that you can wait.
Well,
But you know, that whole issue has been something that the space program has had to deal with ever since we had a space program, and there's all kinds of different ways to approach that.
right. If you gotta go, you gotta go. Great quote. As it's true. Okay, so we've talked about Starliner a bit. We've talked about the suits. The reason that this is not venting is because it's out of water, so I can go get water. But oops. But let's talk about Starship and the 4th test flight, which we thought was going to be May the 4th. Well, it's now May the 7th, and it sounds like it might not be until the end of the month, maybe.
Yeah, I'm thinking at least 2 real weeks, maybe a little bit more for sure. You know, it's interesting. There's a lot of activity that are going on right now. I'm just looking at a different stream right now. Ship 30 is being loaded with cryogenics for its static fire today. Why is Ship 30 important? Because that's for the next flight number 5. So much like we saw with Ship 28 getting ready to launch and Ship 29 getting ready for its flight, we're doing the same thing with Ship 30. And the reason why is that, you know, assuming that everything goes well with Flight 4 and there's not really big mishaps and they don't have to go through a big investigation, I think SpaceX wants to turn it really quickly. So we see Ship 30 getting ready, the Booster 12, even Booster 13 for even the Flight 6, they've already had their cryogenics. Booster 11's already had its static fire. They've been doing a lot of upgrades on the orbital launch sites, some of the tanks, some of the manifolds, all that stuff. So, you know, all of that is still going on, but it looks like it's going to be a few more weeks. We're also going to need to get, obviously, Booster 11, Ship 29 mounted up as a full stack, wet dress rehearsal. And I don't know where we are right now with the FAA process of approving the next flight, but we know a couple of things. One, the FAA is wanting to get away from the launch by launch license. They'd rather do a multiple launch license. Maybe kind of like what we've seen in other programs where, you know, as long as the booster and the ship are of the same block type with not lots of modifications, maybe they can say, okay, for the next 3 launches, you're good to go as long as nothing happens. And that would be very helpful. The other thing that I've heard recently was Jordan, the angry astronaut, is he said with his contacts at least a few days ago, the FAA has not yet received the final report from SpaceX, and that would be, you know, what happened with Booster 10, Ship 28.
Right, the mishap investigation.
Right. So as a couple of days ago, it sounded like they may not have had that. So I don't know how big of a time issue that's going to be. So a couple of weeks, maybe the end of May might be what we're looking at, but still don't know for sure.
And Michael points out there's an overpressure notice issued last night, possible static fire today.
Right. Ship 30 right now has got maybe the first half of the first ring showing of cryogenic oxygen on board, and they're getting ready to put the methane on. So static fire is coming up very soon.
Right. And just disclaimer, this is video from the 3rd launch. So
exactly.
This is not live. This
replay.
That is not today. This is from Pi Day. Ross also points out Elon posted that the heat shield is one of the biggest technical challenges for Starship. How many more flights do you think we'll need before Starship gets fully through reentry? I'm hoping on the next one.
Yeah, well, you know, what we're watching here, the replay from Flight 3, they did do pretty well as far as they got it to orbit. They went across about maybe a fourth of the Earth or so. They, started the process of bringing it back down into the Indian Ocean, or at least it was on the trajectory that naturally brought it there. But there's two parts of that question, or the things that they have to address. One of them is the heat shields themselves and being mounted properly and in the right orientation and made up of the right material so they can survive the reentry.
Right.
And we saw a little tiny bit of that during the last launch, but the bigger issue was controllability. They had a roll that was going on with Ship 28, and as it went through the atmosphere, and I think on our live stream we were actually reacting to that live. The problem was that it was orienting itself all the way around, so it was displaying the heat shield and then the non-heat shield sides, and then it got into a pitching moment too. What they need to be able to demonstrate first, I think, is that they can control the Starship. They can, get rid of that roll. They can get it to about that 70-degree pitch and hold it at that pitch so that it can, properly come through the atmosphere to give the heat shields at least a shot of doing their job. Right. So, Flight 3 was great, but I don't think we got enough from that to be able to say the heat shields were or were not a problem. Now we do know that some of them, and we can see it right here where a couple of them have popped off. How big of an issue is that going to be? We have to have that controllability first before we know for sure. So this flight, what I'm looking for is demonstrate the controllability, and let's get some real data of what the heat shields can or cannot do. Then we can address this. And I do agree with what Elon's saying here is it has always been a huge challenge to do reentry, whether it was, the very first Mercury launches, the Apollo put it to a different level. And that's what Orion's trying to deal with the speeds that they're coming in, what we saw with the space shuttle and more. So it's always been an issue and it needs to be solved. And I hope that IFT4 allows them to get to the point where we can just concentrate on the shields rather than controllability.
Yeah, I really wonder when it's going to be. I thought it would be in the first week of May, based on everything that was said, including by Gwen and Elon and Kathy. So if it is past May 5th or 14th, I'll be out of town. So unfortunately, I might miss it, which is scary.
Well, I'm intending to go down there, so hopefully I can do something. I don't have your channel to do the live stream, but maybe I'll be able to cover it in some way.
Well, I could give you access to StreamYard, or you could do like a live report or something, like a video or something. Because I'm going to be like, honestly, and this is the advice of a lot of people is if you miss, or, if you hadn't made it to a launch, there's going to be a lot of them. And I understand that, but I'm going to get a lot of FOMO, a lot of fear of missing out.
How long are you going to be not able to cover?
Well, I have, I may have just gone to Japan for almost 3 weeks, but I'm going to Washington, D.C. on May 15th, and then I'll be out of town for a few weeks. DC, Florida, and then Salt Lake City. And then at the beginning of June, I'm going to New York City. And then later in June, I'm going to Missouri. I'm just gone a lot.
We're going to have to rebrand your channel, Ellie and Cities?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, that's the nice thing is, you look at someone like Marcus House, he covers Starbase News full time and he's never been there. He's in Tasmania, Australia. So you can cover these things, but, there's something to be said for being there on site and interviewing people, on site. So,
well, we'll see. Space is difficult. This is a prototype development. And just like we were talking with Boeing and the Starliner, for SpaceX, this launch they all are very important, but this one is super important because, they need to build on what they did with IFT3. They need to show that they can duplicate and exceed all of the various parameters that they were able to hit last time. As I mentioned, ship controllability is going to be enormous for them. They really need to demonstrate that. And I'm wondering if both for the booster and the ship, if that's not what's slowing them down as far as determining the root causes and the mitigation steps for the FAA. And what do I mean by that is, the booster, as it was coming down several kilometers up, it started having instability. And I don't know what that was caused by. It may have been a grid fin, it may have been something else, but they need to figure out for sure what was the problem. And is it a design issue? Is it just a malfunction issue of one of the grid fins? Is it something? They need to do that. And they also need to, in my opinion, relook at when they started the landing burn, because it seemed like it was really late. The speed was too high and it was not really recoverable. As far as the ship, one of the things that we saw just before the reentry began and when they were really starting to have some controllability issues is it would look like debris that came across the camera. The camera was on the upper grid fin, and some people thought it might have been tiles. I think it was probably more ice, and most likely it may be related to the choice of using the ullage thrusters, which is basically using the gas that's in the tanks themselves naturally to provide the controllability. It may have frozen up, or it may have caused a problem with that thruster, and that may be what we saw, and that may have been related to the instability. And you can see it right here. The booster is definitely now unstable. It's got a roll problem and a bit of a pitch. And you can also see the speed. We're at 1,300 kilometers an hour at a kilometer. At that speed, you only got seconds before it hits the ground. So they really need to figure that out and maybe change the profile of when that landing bird begins. So I think those two issues may be what's slowing them down with the FAA right now.
Well, and sorry, I got this all set up. So let me show you. I finally got it venting. So this is the Falcon 9 3D printed model. I turned all the lights off so it looks super cool. And this is water, so it is not a bong. I had someone say that it looked like I was, using this for nefarious purposes, but this is just water. Yeah. Well,
the astronaut version,
right? Does yours vent though?
No.
So this is the new design from Stardesk. If you guys are interested in that, here is the link. But you assemble it yourself, or you can 3D print it if for some reason you want to do that and you have 3D printer. I think it's pretty cool that you don't have to have a 3D printer, because I do not. And so we have the crew access arm. And I'm just showing you guys this because so many of you bought the Starship version.
I was going to ask, is that the same company that made the Starship one?
Yes, this is the same company that made the Starship version. And a lot of you guys like that. This is also the same company that makes the SLS. And so this is the brand new one. And I just got it, 2 days ago. So just wanted to share it with you guys, because honestly, I think this might be my favorite one. I really loved the Starship one, but just like how good the quality is and maneuverability, it's very impressive. Look at the water. So anyway, that's why they weren't working, was because I needed to put water in it. But yes, so there's my quick ad break. Let me turn all the lights back on, but we'll play this video again here from IFT3.
Yeah. Well, do any of your viewers have a question?
Let's see. Let me just turn the lights back on. Okay. I think I did see some questions. It looks like Ross says, what do you think the chances are that the booster landing burn will be good enough on IFT4 to allow chopsticks catch attempt on IFT5?
Well, that's a very good question, Ross, and something I've been thinking about myself. We just talked about the fact that Booster 10 had some instability problems and the timing for their landing burn. They're going to have to really be sure that they've got the solution, and if it does work perfectly well, that it's something that's repeatable. So, and another thing, and I don't know if we're going to talk about this, but they had the Luna 10 inputs, and they also had some SpaceX stuff talking about their plans for the in-flight orbital refilling test. But one of the things that's absolutely critical for all of those plans to work is that you have a launch tower, a launch platform, and you have stage 0 fully intact. And I think they're going to want to be absolutely sure that they can control the booster in a repeated manner before they attempt a catch. And even though they're putting all the upgrades to the chopsticks right now and testing it all out, I think they're going to have to get some amazingly quality, good data and demonstrate that they're able to bring the booster in exactly where they wanted, exactly the way they wanted before they attempt it. So my thoughts on IFT5 for a catch are very low.
I agree, unfortunately. I'd like to not agree on that one, but
I do think that when they do it, it's going to be one of those launches that's about as exciting as the very first one, and there's going to be a ton of people that want to see that. Because, from South Padre Island, all, Isla Blanca Park, even where we might be on the Margaritaville, you're going to have some awesome views because it's close enough that you're going to be able to see the whole thing.
Well, here's another question. John wants to know, how long will it take to human rate Starship? Another great question.
Yeah, well, I'm going to break that into two parts. One is, are we talking about the Starship for the human landing system on the moon? Are we talking about taking astronauts from the ground in the Starship, going to orbit and doing missions?
I think part 2.
Yeah, the part 2, I think it's going to be quite some time. They have to be able to prove that they can launch regularly and repeatedly safely. They need to be able to, because of the way the Starship program is developed, they need to be able to land successfully and turn the boosters, and the ground support facilities need to survive. And that's actually another part that we don't talk about a whole lot is, between flights, there's a lot of rework that's done on the orbital launch pad and the tower. Now, some of that is just changing from tanks, from the vertical tanks to horizontal tanks. And some of that is just because they're changing. But some of it is, we saw there's a lot of damage that happens to the orbital launch table. The quick disconnect for the booster, the pipes, the release mechanisms. So they're going to have to solve that so it's repeated as well. And then, of course, the ship itself, where the actual people are going to be, that needs to be developed. Not just that it can launch, go to orbit, come through the atmosphere and land, but you need to have the stuff inside for the people. You need to have the life support. You need to have control stations, chairs, access. You have to have all of that built. And although maybe a lot of that's being done behind the scenes, and we kind of see that with the spacesuit, that they are developing that outside of the view of what's going on with Starship, but all of that needs to be done. So I'm thinking probably many years. To get to that.
Well, I thought it was interesting because I interviewed Tim Dodd when he knew, he was on the Dear Moon crew, but he couldn't announce it yet. And, I don't really know what's going on with Dear Moon. I guess Elon's not following that Japanese billionaire anymore, but we also don't think that, that obviously isn't going to be for quite some time.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, this is just me. So, anyway, I think Tim is going to be well into his 40s before he does that.
Mike, well, he's also 37, right?
I thought he was like middle 30s, whatever. I think he'll be probably at least 45. So how's that?
Oh my God, that's crazy.
That's just Joe. I may be completely wrong.
Well, we're calling it here today.
If we just want to think about it kind of more of a engineering standpoint, is the Polaris Dawn missions, one of the things that it's going to be doing is it's going to be on an orbit that takes it farther than the Gemini program went. And that's one of the highest altitudes other than the moon missions than humans have ever gone. And that introduces more complexity than what we see with low Earth orbit or the space station. Part of it has to do with the Van Allen radiation belts, where they are in the height above the Earth. Some of it has to do with, cosmic rays, radiation, those kinds of things that they're going to have to deal with when they get farther away from the moon. And then there's just the environment that they're going to have to deal with, the cold, the hot, making sure that they have all the provisions that can last long enough, whether it's food or propellants, and operating with, communication. And then also that if something goes wrong, it's going to be a matter of days at least before they get back to the Earth to be able to have some sort of help. So Polaris Dawn is the first step in trying to figure out how this is going to work, especially on a commercial side. And all of that's going to have to be solved before you do a Dear Moon mission that takes people out to the moon. And even if it's just on a return trajectory, it's going to be multiple days. You're going to have to deal with, you've had some experience with zero G kind of stuff. So that people are going to deal with that. So there's a lot that needs to be answered before I think a Dear Moon happens.
Yeah. And just for the record, I'm not aspiring to be an astronaut. So people seem to think I want to do that. People send me, links to applications to be an astronaut, of which I don't even qualify. So I don't know why people are like, don't give up on your dreams. I like to cover this. I like to tell the story. I am not trying to be an astronaut. I want to start a family here on Earth, not trying to be an astronaut. Respect astronauts. Why would I even attempt to take that, position from someone who that's been their lifelong dream when so anyway, just putting it out there, that is not my dream.
Well, I'm looking forward to your on-site interview with the first person that goes back to the moon in 55 years.
100%.
You can be there and you can interview them, but then you come back.
That's my goal. And I want to be on the sidelines for, the people who go to Mars and all of those things. But it ain't me. People are like, don't you want to go to Mars? And it's like, no, don't you want to have a Martian baby? No, I want to have kids here on Earth. I actually like Earth. Yes. So let's see. There was another question here from Ross, who, thank you for participating. Sometimes there's not a lot of participation, so we appreciate it. How long do you think it'll take for an operational Starship Launchpad in Florida to be commissioned, given how frequently Falcon 9 launches from the Cape?
That's actually a really good question. And I appreciate you asking it, Ross, because obviously the main focus is what's going on at Starbase right now. We know that they're thinking, they're doing preparations now to build the second tower. That will give them more flexibility to do different missions. Also a backup in case one of them has a problem. But they are very close in proximity too. So I think, although I don't know, this is just a guess, but if you look at that mission profile for the on-orbit refueling, and I think they wanted to try to do that sometime in 2026. For that to work, having another facility that is at least up and running and able to do, it may not be operational, but it may be for test out in Florida, gives them a couple of capabilities that they may really want to do. And we may see, depending on how the second tower at Starbase goes and what changes we see, we may see more work in 2025 over at Cape Canaveral to get the second launch tower. But by having two different locations, two different towers, and maybe two different systems, being able to do an on-flight or on-orbit refueling would be a lot more easily done than if you just have one tower or two towers at one location, because you're going to have to launch the target Starship first, and that's their plan, and then somewhere after that, whether it's a couple of days or a week later, you would send the chaser that has the cryogenics on it, so they can do the transfer. And to do that, you need to have your launch systems able to support very rapid, use. And we already talked about, they haven't been able to demonstrate that yet with what we've seen at Starbase with the first orbital launch tower, our platform and the tower, because it takes months for that to happen. So, I think they're going to try to do a push to get that second system over at the Cape sooner than later. As far as operational, meaning that we have the final design of the Starship and we're going to be, I don't know, launching a space telescope or whatever, I think it's also going to be years down the road.
Right. Lee is on X and he says, I've just joined. What have I missed in 60 seconds? Well, we started talking about the fact that Starliner was delayed. There's a lot of negativity surrounding the Starliner launch in general. A lot of kind of FUD and debate over whether we need a second capsule. Then we talked about the Polaris Dawn suits being revealed this weekend and kind of, their functionality. And these will be used in the first ever private commercial spacewalk. And now we're talking about when will we have the fourth flight of Starship and kind of looking ahead to timelines for going to Mars, Starship being operational, etc.
Good summary.
So a lot. Yeah. So is there anything else that you'd like to touch on? I know that we've been going an hour. I think that it's been a very good chat.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you just having me on. There is a lot going on. We only touched a very small part of it. To me, what's kind of exciting to see is just there are so many efforts that are going on, both on the government side with NASA and also on the contractor civilian side, that are the goal is to support our return to the moon. And it's neat to see all of these various programs that are going on. I know Starliner isn't specifically for the moon, but it does bring added work that can support our future missions. So I'm really, really happy to see that. And I hope that we see a lot more of it. I know that you had a conversation with Eric Berger recently, and you were kind of talking about the Artemis program. Is it in jeopardy and all that? I think that just by seeing the amount of work that's going on, it may change in detail, but I think we're still focused on that as a nation and all of the various parts, the government and civilian. And I'm really happy to see this level of interest right now.
Yeah, right. There was a question that was asked a few times. Do you think that we'll see a Starlink launch on Starship in the near future? So obviously that's more near term than any sort of crew on board, but yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly within the next year, it fits within the prototype nature of what they're trying to do with Starship, because Starlink is obviously owned by SpaceX. Although it's an important satellite system, I think if they can show that they can, launch with a certain degree of confidence, that they're going to want to try to do that, because one, it's a way of getting more experience with actually carrying something in the Starship versus it just going up empty. And two, if they're successful, then it really will give a boost to the Starlink constellation, because they can get so many more of them up there. So I think that assuming that IFT4 and then 5 and then 6 go pretty well, then maybe, depending on the timing, maybe by the end of the year, early next year. But the other thing to keep in mind is that version 2 of the Starship is looming. So, will they be ready to use that for a Starlink mission, or are they going to do some prototype launches with that? I don't know. But I think within a year, it's possible.
Great. And then just off topic, sort of off topic, I have secured an interview with the first ever Neuralink patient. Awesome. So I'll be doing a live stream so that people can ask questions about, hey, you got the Neuralink chip implanted in your brain. What's that like? Is, the first in the human trials. And so that'll be really interesting on May 20th. And then you also released a video today, which I'm going to share in the comments. You got to tour the Boring Company. So how'd you swing that?
I did. It was actually it was kind of neat. The Boring Company themselves reached out to me, and I think it was because of the coverage of the boring tunneling operation at Giga Texas and some of the stuff that I've been showing, and they really liked how I was covering it, the information that I was giving, and they offered me a tour of the site. We were originally going to try to do the tour of the actual tunnel at Giga Texas, but we had to make a change, so I went over to the Bastrop facility, which is where the Boring Company is kind of headquartered right now, and it's about 15 miles to the east of Giga Texas. And I got to meet a lot of people. Nick, David, and Lisa took me on the tour and arranged the tour. I got a chance to meet a lot of people that work there. Ask them a lot of questions, some of which I can reveal, and that's what's in the part 1 and part 2. Some of it I was on an NDA on, I can't really say, but what I can say is meeting the people, talking with them, just seeing how enthusiastic they are about what they are trying to do, the challenges that they're trying to face, and the approach that they're using to try to overcome those challenges was, for me, very inspiring, and it was exciting. And we've been talking a lot about space here, and I don't know how many people know, but one of the things about the Boring Company is that it was actually spun off from SpaceX, and they brought some of the engineers from SpaceX initially to set up the company, but they also brought the kind of philosophies of first principles and also iterative design. And a lot of the stuff that we're seeing with the Starship, how they're developing the prototypes, like right now, Ship 29 and Booster 11 is getting ready to go, but we already know that they're obsolete because they're looking at version 2. It's the exact same thing with the Boring Company, and we're seeing that with their tunnels. Their tunneling machines called tunnel boring machines, and they're called the Proof Rocks. And they have Proof Rock 2 doing Las Vegas. Proof Rock 3 is a new version. It's at Giga Texas undergoing its testing, doing the work. And I was able to see Proof Rock 4 almost finished in the factory. So a lot to see in the videos.
That's awesome. Well, hopefully people can check that out. I left that in the comments if they'd like to. And I have another interview coming up here. So I'll be on Herbert's channel, Brighter with Herbert. I haven't spoken to him in a while, so he wants to interview me for some reason.
Tell him hi for me.
Yes, but yeah, well, thank you guys for joining. We hope that you enjoyed this chat. Depending on when the Starliner launch is, maybe we can co-stream it or something.
That would be cool.
Yeah, I think it would be maybe worth doing. So thank you guys for watching. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we will talk again soon. Awesome.